things in life, there's a certain pattern. And as we listen to our readings and as we reflect upon week after week, we see the pattern developing. And today that pattern is even more evident for us because of what we heard last week in our gospel. And what was lacking in that individual of last week's gospel who tore down those barns, built larger ones, and then Jesus says, and what will come of you? What will come of your things when your life is required of you? Today we get the answer very clearly. And in our first reading, we hear from wisdom of how the Israelites had that faith in God. Through Moses speaking to them and then listening, not always faithfully, but God is faithful. And God kept that promise and helped them. It was through their faith and their participation, their action in responding to God's invitation to be saved, that they were able to come from Egypt into the promised land. Faith is a critical component in that situation, but also their action as well. Today, as we listen to our gospel, we hear of the next portion of Luke's gospel. It's right after what we heard. If you open at the Bible and you looked at last week's portion, this would be right afterwards. And Jesus is continuing to help us to look at our life and to see how we are responding to the Lord. And he says it in very stark terms. If your life is required of you, will you be ready? And any one of us recognizes that taking time to prepare is important. You came to church today. You thought yesterday of what Mass you wanted to come to. You figured out how long it would take you to get ready, and you prepared to get here. It's part of life. As we begin school and as you prepare for work tomorrow, you'll take that time to think about what needs to be ready for tomorrow, for the actions that will take place. Without good preparation, there isn't much hope for great success. You might get through the day, but we want to be successful in what we do. And so we prepare. We take the time to calculate and figure out what we need and to be ready. But there was one thing that was missing in last week's gospel that is important this week as well, and that is identified in our second reading. It was one word, and it said it over and over again in a second reading. What was that word that is critically important in our preparation? Faith, exactly. Faith. Having faith in God. But it's not a passive faith. It's not saying, well, I have faith, God, you take care of everything. No, it's an active faith. The Israelites were active. They listened to what Moses had to say. They responded. They failed at times, but they acted. As we listened to our second reading, it reminded us, Paul's letter to the Hebrews reminded them as well as us of the action, the faith that Abraham had, but also his active participation in God's plan. He didn't sit back and just say, well, God, you take care of everything. Here's my son. You go and do what you need to do. But he was actively engaged in that relationship in what God was asking of him. The part of last week's gospel is that man took it upon himself and thought it was only himself that would cause him to be successful. He failed to realize the importance of God in his life. And today, as we listen to this week's gospel, that's what Jesus is stressing for us. How are we engaged in that faith that God shares with us? It's a gift that God gives. But like any gift that we receive, we have to do something for it. If I gave each one of you a gift on the way out of church, beautifully wrought package, and you kept it in the trunk of your car, what good would it do? It's only until you opened it and you saw and you were able to use that $1,000. And now I got your attention. Don't get excited. There's no $1,000 I'm giving away. Actually, I need $1,000. But we have to do something with that, right? We have to do something with the gift that God gives to us. And that's what we find in our first reading of wisdom, that they were active participants in God's saving plan, in the faith that they had with God. That's what we find with our letter to the Hebrews, in Abraham and in relationship with God, actively participating. And that's what we find in our gospel today as well. How are we actively participating in that faith that God shares with us? And so I think the challenge of this week is to look at our own life and say, yes, I have faith in God. Otherwise, why would you be here? But how am I deepening that faith? How am I enriching that relationship with the Lord? Am I entering into prayer a little more? Am I recognizing that others at work or in the drive to work or at school are also members of God's family? Do I see my faith active in the work and in the actions of my own life? Moses and Abraham today, and Jesus mentioned in our gospel of the stories, help us to recognize that faith is a gift from God, but it also takes our participation, our action in our life. And so during this week, may we take that action, and may we take that opportunity to think, how am I deepening? What am I doing to increase my relationship with the Lord, so that the gift that he gives to me, and when the day comes when he calls me back home, I may respond and show the Lord all the good that I have done because of the faith he has given.